Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into active learning, a super powerful idea that gets to the bottom of why some lessons stick with us forever while others just, poof, they're gone the moment we leave the room.
Let's start with a feeling I think we all know. You know the one, right? You're sitting in a long presentation, you're nodding along, everything seems to make sense, but then an hour later, you'd be lucky to remember the key points. So what's going on there? And more importantly, what's the alternative? Well, it all comes down to the huge difference between these two approaches. On one side, you've got passive learning, where you're basically just a bucket and information gets poured in. But on the other side, you have active learning, where you're not a bucket, you're a builder. The goal is to actually construct your own understanding. One's about watching, the other is all about building. Okay, so let's get right into it. What exactly do we mean when we say active learning? At its core, it's all about making your brain do the work. It's the difference between just hearing some information and actually doing something with it, connecting it to things you already know, wrestling with the idea, and really making it your own. Now, you should know active learning is kind of this big umbrella term. You've probably heard of some of its relatives, right? Things like student-centered learning, problem-based learning. They're all part of the same family. They all put the learner in the driver's seat. So where did this idea even come from? This isn't some newfangled teaching trend, by the way. This whole approach is grounded in over a century of solid research into how our brains are actually wired to learn. And you can really trace the foundations back to these three absolute giants in the field. Their work totally changed the game for how we understand learning and cognitive development. Okay, so Piaget's big idea was something called constructivism. And here's the key takeaway. He argued that learning is not like filling up an empty jar. No way. It's much more like building with Legos. You take these new pieces of information and you actively snap them onto the structure you've already built in your mind. Then you've got Vygotsky, who gave us this brilliant idea of a sweet spot for learning. He called it the zone of proximal development, that perfect little zone where a task is just a bit too tough to do on your own, but totally possible if you have some help. That, he said, is where the real learning magic happens. And building right on top of that, Bruner gave us the word for that help: scaffolding. This is all that temporary support a teacher provides to help a student succeed in that sweet spot. The training wheels on a bike are the perfect way to think about it. They give you the supports you need to get going, but they come off as soon as you're ready to ride on your own. All right, so because this is so different from that classic, teacher at the front of the room style, some pretty big myths have popped up. Let's bust them.
Okay, myth number one. This is probably the biggest one out there, that in an active classroom, the teacher just takes a back seat, right? They just step back and let the students figure it all out. But is that what's really happening?
Not even close. In fact, the research shows the opposite is true. The teacher's role actually gets way more important and honestly more sophisticated. They're not just a passive facilitator who guides from the side. They become an activator of learning, someone who leads, instructs, and really drives the whole process. And get this, the data on this is just crystal clear. This famous research synthesis from John Hattie shows that the positive impact an activator teacher has on student achievement is 0.60. A facilitator, just 0.17. I mean, that's more than 3 times the impact. So yeah, the teacher is absolutely crucial. All right, myth number 2. This one's all about what an active classroom is supposed to look like. When you hear the term, you probably picture this, right? A loud room, kids moving all over the place, tons of group work. But is that the whole story? Nope, not at all. Because the real action, the important part, is what's happening up here, in the brain. It's not about being physically busy. Active learning is, at its heart, about thinking hard. So a student could be sitting quietly, totally focused on a tough problem the teacher just gave them, and that is 100% active learning. Okay, so we know what it is and we know what it isn't. Let's bring this all home and talk about why this matters so much and what this actually looks like in practice. So you might be thinking, why bother with all this? Well, the benefits are huge. And we're not just talking about memorizing facts to pass a test. We're talking about building a really deep, flexible kind of understanding that students can actually apply in totally new situations. It's about developing the independence and the critical thinking skills that are going to matter for the rest of their lives. So for any of you who are teachers or trainers out there, here is a super simple 4-step playbook that's backed by tons of research. First, you got to activate what students already know. Then give them the new stuff in small, bite-sized pieces so they don't get overwhelmed. Next, give them a chance to practice with lots of that supportive scaffolding. And finally, and this is super important, give them time to actually process it all. And look, if there is one single number I want you to remember from all of this, it's this one, 3. Research suggests that's typically how many times a learner needs to engage with a new idea, in different ways, for it to really truly sink in and stick. Hearing it once just isn't going to cut it. You've got to hit it from different angles, activate it, practice it, and process it. This quote just says it all, doesn't it? The goal of teaching is not to cover content, but to uncover learning. It's a complete shift in thinking, right? It moves the focus away from the teacher's actions and puts it squarely on the student's experience. So that leaves us with this final thought. The real question isn't just what will you learn next, but how will you learn it? It's a game-changing way to think about things, whether you're a teacher, a student, or just someone who loves to learn. Thanks so much for watching.